Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Atlantic Council Cyber Statecraft Initiative Director, Ms. Clara Jordan.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, General Alexander, for your remarks and really for setting the stage for today's conversation. Before we turn to the next panel, just a couple of housekeeping announcements. So this next session is on the record. Please do not forget to silence your cell phones. And before I invite the next speaker to the stage, I will just run briefly over the format of the conversation so you know what to expect. We will have 3 speakers who will come up to the stage and speak separately. After that, they will come back on the stage for a Q&A with the audience. So if you have any pressing questions, please hold them till the very end. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Secretary Tomasz Zdzikot, the Secretary of State at the Polish Ministry of Defense, to the audience. Secretary, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, all distinguished guests, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It is a great pleasure and honor to be here with you and to have a chance to talk, to meet such a great number of experts, of members of cybersecurity community. I was asked to answer a few questions on cybersecurity issues, but instead of answering the questions, I will do something else, so I will ask some more. First of all, first question that I would like to ask is, why do we still have a strong concept of treating cyber threats, cybersecurity issues as a new challenge? I'm almost confident that it is not that strong in this particular room, but generally it is. It is like that. Let me start with a quote. We share the same network with our adversaries. I will say it again. We are staking our future on a resource that we have not yet learned to protect. The number of known potential adversaries conducting research on information attacks is growing rapidly. Technology is increasing the sophistication of their capabilities. Meanwhile, if our security remains where it is now, the risks and costs of attacking us will keep getting lower. Government and industry are in this together, and we must work these problems out together. This is a part of a speech of former Director of Central Intelligence Agency, George J. Tenet, on April 1998, more than 20 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. And it was just a year after a first known, maybe not the very first in the world, but the first that known and widely commented attacks, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure entities. Because in 1997 in Worcester, Massachusetts, an American teenager using very basic tools deactivated a small airport in this area. So why do we still say that it is a new threat? In 1998, the same year that George Tenet gave his speech, in Poland, in Polish Police Academy in Szczytno, a group of experts, scientists, and members of law enforcement community were preparing the first conference on technical aspects of cybercrime. And it was all a great piece of future thinking, because let's remember that we talk about times when we were still using 5.25 and 3.5 floppy disks. So in 1998, talking about cybercrimes, about cyber threats, was really a future thinking, but it is not now. It is not a case of today. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1998, the world has changed, and it is changing rapidly. It is still changing. It is estimated that every second, the global network increases by 30 gigabytes of data. And is this that much as 20 years ago covered the entire internet? The number of web pages increased from about 70 million in 2002 to 1 billion in 2014. It is estimated that every day the Google browser is being used more than 3.5 billion times. In the United States, 88% of Americans is still online. 25% of the world's population uses Facebook. In case of Poland, it is almost 30% of population using Google and almost 60% of Facebook users. At the same time, the concept of Internet of Things is growing very rapidly. We say that until 2020, there is going to be 50 billion of items still connected, permanently connected to the Internet. So we cannot say that threats to the national security, to the internal safety, are only of a kinetic nature. They are also coming from the digital world. The global network became the basic tool for work, communication, and entertainment. But the digital world cannot be recognized today as a mainstay of stability and security. This is unfortunately an environment in which individual units and organized criminal groups operate actively and creatively using new tools. In the geopolitical and institutional dimension, it is also an attractive area for many countries to pursue political goals, intelligence tasks, or a specific projection of power. In 2015, as the United States Government Accountability Office says, there was more than 77,000 incidents compromising the safety of United States government networks and systems. Due to Polish reports, due to the report of Internal Security Agency responsible for the governmental sector and systems, in 2017 there was more than 28,000 incidents reported, of which nearly 6,000 were confirmed as actually threatening safety. Finally, it happened like George Tenet predicted. Attacks and generally hostile activity in cyberspace is pretty attractive for everyone who wants to do that. Why? There are some common features that accelerate those hostile activities. First of them is so-called asymmetry, understood as a disproportion between the forces and means that should be used to carry out an effective attack at a given moment, and the inputs and resources that should be constantly used to ensure the highest possible level of security. To make a long phrase short, it is cheaper and easier to make an attack, and cybersecurity is pretty expensive. It is pretty hard and pretty expensive to be prepared. And no one says that you can be 100% sure that you are not going to be attacked. You will be attacked. Second common feature is cross-border activity. Of course, the ability to operate in another country is not related to physical presence and in its territory, speed. Cyber attack is the fastest and easiest way to carry out large-scale criminal intelligence and military operations. It is easy, as it was mentioned previously, to hide identity of the perpetrator. And of course, as everyone says, every chain is as strong as its weakest link, and those who deals with hostile activity in cyberspace always finds the weakest points. It is also, as a Deputy Minister of National Defense, I have to say that it has also become a military issue. Since 2011, the United States recognized cyberspace as an operational sphere of war, and announced a reaction to attacks in cyberspace as well as all other threats, which results in creation U.S. Cyber Command, and it was mentioned before. It is also a matter for the NATO alliance. Since 2014, since the final declaration of the NATO summit held in Wales, the alliance confirmed that it should be aware that cyber threats and attacks will be more frequent, more complex, and potentially devastating. It was also a time of declaring that there is a possibility of using Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty in case of an attack in cyberspace. During the Warsaw Summit in 2016, NATO reaffirmed its defense mandate in this area and recognized cyberspace as an area of action in which it must defend itself as effectively as in the air, the land and the sea. NATO declarations raises many challenges and puts a lot of questions on different levels in front of every NATO member, as well as NATO itself, including and starting with the most fundamental ones. So I started with asking questions. There will be a couple more of them. First, how to understand Article 5 of the Washington Treaty in cyberspace. Cyberspace is a domain that has no boundaries, so how to adopt common criteria for assessing an attack on an alliance state committed in the cyber domain. It is a question of how to respond to an attack in cyberspace. Should we use all the available forces, or should the answer be limited only to the cyberspace? What are the rules of using force in cyberspace? If we say that there is no difference between the traditional kinetic conception of threats and their counterpart in cyberspace, it is necessary to build capabilities and capacities in this area which will be used to ensure the security of the alliance and its members. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, as a member of the NATO alliance, as a member of the European Union, we are a part of all the discussions, we are a part of many common projects in the NATO, in the European Union. For example, tomorrow I will take part in a meeting of ministers of defense considering the new PESCO project, cyber response teams. We are looking on our American allies and friends who adopted on September 2018 a new national cyber strategy with a strong indications regarding allied cooperation, such as a concept of cyber deterrence initiative, very interesting one. We are talking with our friends. I paid a visit to the United States on December 2018, talking with very old friends of Poland from Illinois National Guard and in Pentagon on cooperation in the field of cybersecurity. And we are preparing in the first period of this year 2 important international agreements. First of them with the NATO, the Memorandum of Understanding on Cyber Defense, and second of them is a concept of cooperation with the United States in the field of cybersecurity, which is called basically Cyber Defense Cooperation Roadmap. But despite developing of allied relations, each country is of course individually responsible for protecting its internal structures. In Poland, we have a strong belief, and we are pretty confident, that our country can have a significant competitive advantage, because we have something that we can call as a national treasure. Our national treasure are outstanding experts. We have one of the best in the world, and not only the ones who shortened the Second World War, breaking the Enigma code, but the present ones that are every year, year by year, winning all the military and civilian IT competitions. For example, last year in 2018, a team from Ministry of National Defense won the NATO TIDE hackathon. Ladies and gentlemen, building capabilities in Poland started a number of years ago, but for the last 3 years, there is an acceleration. In 2017, we have adopted the first cybersecurity strategy with 4 main goals. In August 2018, we have the first Polish Act on National Security System entered into force, and we stand on 3 pillars: Internal Security Agency, Ministry of National Defense, and Ministry of Digital Affairs, responsible for 3 national CERT teams. In Ministry of National Defense, we see cyberspace as a crucial, one of the most important tasks. That's why in 2018, Ministry of National Defense, Minister Błaszczak appointed a special task force that prepared a number of recommendations that are now being implemented in Ministry of National Defense, considering development of expert staff, organizational changes, as well as scientific and research topics. We have established a first in Poland MBA type course in the Warsaw University of Technology, Military University of Technology. Ladies and gentlemen, I started with a quote, and this very short introducing remarks I will end with one. I will end with a quote by General Mark Milley, Chief of Staff of US Army. He said that the first shots of the next actual war will likely be fired in cyberspace and likely with devastating effect. Well, I do agree with him with one supplement. The war in cyberspace continues. It is not a challenge of a future. It is a challenge of a very present time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Now please join me in welcoming the second speaker featured in this morning's spotlight, the former assistant to the U.S. President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism and a friend of the Atlantic Council, Tom Bossert.
Damon, thank you. Can you hear me if I walk away from the podium? For all of you that sit through all these speeches, I'll be brief, shortening General Alexander's 2 hours to 1. So let's see, I don't disagree with anything I've heard here today, and I've now served for 2 different presidents in a role that's been described as a chief risk officer for the United States. And I start with that because there's no real security at this point. We are managing risk. At this point in cyberspace, to suggest that there is an absolute security would be folly, and we don't tend to speak that way. I'd like to see if I can broaden the conversation a little bit, maybe with some context. It strikes me the timing of this conference here fits into the context of the title of our event. It's cyber statecraft, not cybersecurity, and that's by design. What we're confronting today is a classic battle between liberal and illiberal forces that we have seen play out in this country more than any other country in the world. After I left President Bush's administration, my first European trip was to Poland, and now that I've left President Trump's administration, my first European trip is to Poland, and that's not by accident. I not only care about our partnership and believe it to be stronger now than ever, but I believe that you sit next to a country, Russia, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for pointing it out, that embodies the classic communist principles that we now see the Chinese embodying in cyberspace. You stand at the forefront of our defense, and I want to see if I can just observe what's going on in the world today and how cyber is going to affect each of those things. In a few weeks, you're going to host a summit to counter, hopefully, a growing coalition of people against the malign influence of Iran in the region. And I think that the world will be well served to stand on the shoulders of Polish resistance and strong backbone in that effort. I'm thrilled that you're hosting it, but make no mistake, the Iranian response will be in cyberspace as they become frustrated with us and with our growing coalition. Your former prime minister is trying to battle out the Brexit failure, the divorce settlement being rejected, and trying to hold together a European Union that includes Great Britain. I'm not certain. The unanswered questions seem to be bigger than the potential, or at least as equal to the potential disruptive forces on Europe. And cybersecurity stands at the heart of the European Union and NATO coalition, as we don't have any rules. We celebrate 100 years of Poland regaining its independence and nearly 100 years of U.S.-Polish diplomatic ties. And when President Trump came here, I looked up his speech from his first year, his visit here to Warsaw. He hit on 5 themes: objecting to and rejecting Soviet-era communism, fighting radical Islamic terrorism, enforcing national sovereignty, protecting our shared values, and delivering a positive future outlook. Well, let's take those in order. I'd like to deliver a slight challenge here to this assembled group. We're going to be here for 2 days together, and you don't need to hear too many more speeches. General Alexander put forth a notion that I think is achievable of a massive technological change that allows us to catch that 0-day patient, as opposed to patching after the first 4, 5, 6, or 100 of us face some consequence. I think that there's a lot of value and merit there, but I have a slightly negative view of how that might be played out. I'm not entirely certain our country or yours will ever grant the trust necessary in a centralized, powerful government to launch such a capability into our networks, data, systems. I do believe that General Alexander is probably in a better position now as the CEO of a company in the private sector in the United States to protect our country than he was when he was the 4-star general in charge of United States Cyber Command and the NSA. That's a pretty powerful revelation. And so my challenge here is that we struggle through this process to develop rules of international order. I was there the day that General Alexander explained to President Bush what botnet attacks and denial of service attacks were, and the president said, there's robots running around in the internet, I don't understand. And the general thoughtfully explained it. I was there then for President Trump trying to grapple with these same things. I called the general in to come back from retirement and reprise his role to explain to the president how things work. And this president had a much different view. He started from the premise that our 20-year-old generation starts from, it's not securable. Anything you do on the internet is at risk. And he's never sent an email in his life. Now he uses Twitter, but he reads the newspaper and he sends handwritten notes and he believes computers are inherently unsafe. And I thought, what a profound difference. An older president at a 20-year distance, and he's got a more realistic view, but almost a pessimistic one. And so what he did is he left us with the challenge. If you can fix it, I'll be surprised, but go do it and I'll support you. Got me thinking about what we mean by deterrence, and I want to expand the scope of your thinking this week. I don't believe that any cyber attack will ever have a deterrent effect on its victim. In fact, I think it would embolden me to strike back or to take an even more aggressive tone. I don't know how you behave, but if you're attacked, it would have to be, I would imagine, pretty devastating for it to defeat your will and spirit. For the most part, what we have seen is cyber effects operations escalate. They don't de-escalate or deter. And so what I want to do is talk about deterrence in the context of all the other elements of national power. It's not understood, but we are watching with the US-China trade dispute, I won't call it a war, we are watching a fundamental cybersecurity principle play out. I can tell you that President Trump and I have had this conversation at length. What he's doing to impose costs on China through fiscal and diplomatic and trade levers of power is designed to rebuke their cheating and stealing, to be simple, and to see if we can change their future cheating and stealing behavior and lessen it in some fashion. In other words, the first $30 to $150 billion worth of trade tariffs were directly and squarely leveled against China because they have engaged in cyber-enabled theft. So we are not talking about hacking them. We are not talking about a cyber institution leading that effort. We're not talking about Cyber Command or your new centralized digital defense function. We are talking about the leader of our country marshaling all of his forces. And in this case, his trade, economic, and fiscal tools to try to alter the behavior of bad actors. And so if I can, I'd like you to expand the scope of our discussion this week to include future technological advances. I'd like us to think about deterrence by using all elements of national power. What would you do to deter bad actors that are, at this point, from nation states' perspective, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and some hodgepodge of non-nation state actors like the terrorist threat we see. Those are the 5 I include in the beginning of our conversation. And then I'd like you to not abandon our multilateral institutions because they're exceedingly important. But I'd like us to think about faster, more nimble solutions that would involve bilateral agreements and bilateral actions. As we develop this playbook, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes if we act, and we're going to make mistakes if we don't act. I would encourage a bent towards action. It's time to defend ourselves in ways that are novel, unique, technological, and diplomatic. And at this stage, the United States working with Poland directly and the United States working in a bilateral arrangement with Israel and Great Britain, 2 other bilateral partners that we've already established, I think stands a better chance of acting quickly, and acting in a way that's consistent with our values. And those values that President Trump outlined in his 5 points, in my view, in cyberspace, come down to this. We must embrace the principles of individual property and property ownership, the rule of law, and an unwavering commitment to free markets. And then we need to be willing to punish and maybe even exclude those who do not from the internet itself, if necessary. That's going to be a difficult hurdle to overcome. But to do otherwise would be to allow the communist nations and the autocratic nations that are using this tool against us at will right now to bring us to their level and drag us down to their level of behavior. I don't believe that we'll do that. I believe that we will. I'm sad to see the CEO has left here of your bank. He asked a very interesting question last night, and it's the question on all leaders' minds. While you government types rattle your saber, how much is it going to cost us private sector types? He's going to protect our money. Our military is going to protect our lives. People in this room need to think about how we protect everything in the middle. And I believe it's going to be something that involves a far greater level of coordination and cooperation than our previous military institutions and treaty institutions have ever formally contemplated. So if it's a use of force that kills someone, we will find that subjective answer that leadership always provides. Some president and some leader will say that's enough and we'll defend ourselves. Short of that, I think we can come up with some really interesting ways of imposing costs on our enemies and those that don't stand for our values. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I think that I'm going to now join a panel, so if you have questions, save them for that, and I will take my seat. Ambassador, thank you for leading us off today with a perspective of history. If I can leave with my future prediction, I think General Alexander's predictions will come true in the next 10 years, and that we will have a handle on some of the basic network security problems that he's outlined this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. So I just invite our audience to start to think about the answers to the questions that Tom asked us to think about. And now I will invite the last speaker of this morning's spotlight, General William Mayville, the former Deputy Commander of U.S. Cyber Command. The floor is yours, sir.
Experiences with the United States Cyber Command. The first thing I tell you is that it was a good speech up till now. I thought I'd just remind everyone that the United States military has been in cyber for decades. We're now in the, it's not as new as we think, and while we're struggling with new challenges, there is a tradition and a history and an understanding. We're now seeing that the third and fourth generation of cyber warriors are inside the rank and file of military formations. Exploitation, pursuit, hunting operations, these are all essential military activities in any military operation today. Within the services, connectivity, digital linkages of weapon systems, the automation, these are foundational to the services. We have learned how to be a joint force because we have enabled the powers available to us in Cyber Command. One concept that we've approached things doctrinally as well, and we've got some great concepts. One was introduced to us by then Keith Alexander, General Alexander, was this idea that as you defend your networks, we defend it in depth, and he helped us think our way through this. And by the way, I don't know if you know this, General Alexander, don't know if you know this, sir, but we typically refer to him as the Admiral Rickover of military cyber. For those of you who don't know Admiral Rickover, he's the father of the nuclear navy. He was the second oldest serving flag officer, second only to Omar Bradley, who was the first. And I just learned today that with 16 grandchildren, I now know who the third oldest serving flag officer was in the United States military. But what General Alexander taught the department was look at your networks not as something that's linear and that's a system, look at it as depth. And so what you have today in our system is this concept, our networks is this concept of depth. You put a layer of belts, that overlap. You put sensors throughout from the internet access point to the endpoints. You channel the flow of traffic. You put high-end analytics and heuristics on top of it. And the key thing that General Alexander brought to the department was this idea of maneuver within the space, and you had these cyber protection teams. And so today you have teams that can go into a network, find an anomalous behavior, isolate it, quarantine it, and then as a result of doing all that, reduce it, and then in the remedy come back and we re-index the network so that it is stronger and more powerful, and the defense improves every time we have an intrusion. If you go in the field, that's the defense of the networks. If you go in the field, combat arms officers like myself are expected to treat cyber as a scheme of fires that supports a scheme of maneuver. We are expected today in the battle space to find and fix our adversaries in this domain of cyberspace. And depending on the effect you want, sometimes you can actually finish them there. Or if you have a more lethal finishing requirement, you link those activities to your maneuver force in the physical world. And all of this is to show that we have today generations now that know how to fight, very comfortable, and they approach, it allows them to approach the warfighting concepts empirically and based on data and experience, and not necessarily resting on theory or the hopes or aspirations of yet unrealized technologies. There's a real confidence in the command. Cyber Command today is a workforce of about 6,200 folks, and it reaches throughout the force, and the biggest thing that it's doing is integrating the capabilities within the military in the physical world with what's available, synchronizing it with what's available in the cyber domain. That said, October of 18, the government General Accounting Office, which is the watchdog agency for the United States Congress, publishes a report. And in that report, it says that basically the Department of Defense's acquisition programs for future weapon systems are highly vulnerable to cyber attacks because for days, for years, and indeed for decades, they have been ignoring the threat warnings and the threat predictions and the threat reports about cyber vulnerabilities. Services did not build those things into their requirements. Industry did not anticipate it, or did for cost benefit or for business decisions, didn't build it in because it would mean a more expensive cost. And so basically what we have today is $1.7 trillion portfolio of future weapon systems for the 21st century. And if you are to believe this report, it's questionable whether they're going to all work in this new cyber environment. Now, I'm convinced we'll fix it, but at what cost? I raise this to you because I just told you about an operational force that has tremendous capability and confidence. And at the same time, it's clear that the institution of national security, the institutions within the Department of Defense, we have a lot more to do and a lot more to get ourselves in this domain. Too much of the department still does not see itself in a domain like air, space, land. And therein, I think, is where our chief challenges are. The Secretary was correct in mentioning that cyber is inherently, the space inherently is asymmetrical. It favors the attacker. It favors the attacker and it rewards the attacker's audacity. It allows the attacker to work in compartmentalization. It allows the attacker to obfuscate. It allows the attacker to conduct simultaneously multi-layered operations. And while doing this, it has the luxury of simply plucking away at the vulnerability points of its defender. The defender has to defend basically on what is a probability. It has to make risk trade-off decisions. It has to look and say, What is the most likely area we're going to get attacked? What are the things I want to protect? How much resources do I have? And it necessarily makes a set of decisions in which it knows it has vulnerabilities, and the only guard it has against it is vigilance. And that means that the area of space that we really have to address is that of the security and defense. You can have all the offensive that you want, but if you don't have confidence in your security and your defense, then how likely are you going to use those tools? So when I was in the Pentagon, I was the director of operations and then the director of the Joint Staff, where I spent a lot of time looking at the war plans. One of the things that cyber does to our thinking about war plans is that the strategic environment is changing. Let me give you a couple examples. We have, for many years now, had to rely more and more on partners. The department has had to rely more and more on partners within the defense industrial base to allow us to push our combat power forward, to move from home space to away space. We cannot today move and sustain a large joint force in somebody else's, in an enemy's and adversary's battle space without the transportation sector. Our indications and warning systems are dependent upon the power grid of our nation. Our automation, information technology depends on the vertical of within industry that deals with computer science and technology industry. So the challenge we have is now, this is what's going on in the physical world. Now you put this in the cyber domain and you realize that you have to revisit your war plans, because that surface area that we once defended that was just in the military, that now has to extend somehow to these key verticals in industry. We have to have new partnerships. We can't decide at the moment that we want to project combat power to suddenly realize that we've got to make sure that we've got to make sure that the industry that we're relying on to project our power, the industry that we're relying on to provide power so that we can do indications and warnings, the industry that we're relying upon for communications technology, the way in which we synchronize. Remember, we come together as a joint force through the internet, through the connectivity. We can't decide at the moment of crisis that suddenly we need a new partnership. And we've got to figure out how to do this, because the home game is now connected to the away game. There's another thing that's happening out there in the physical space that is also impacting how we want to plan operations. Today, there's the biggest boom in investments today is in critical infrastructure. It's estimated by, I think, 2040, the number I saw was, it's estimated to be valued at $74 trillion. And what's happening is we've had this concept of global commons, that we could go anywhere and do what we needed to, and we would have a series of infrastructure that through partnership and through systems that we were comfortable in, we could project power based on critical infrastructure that was in place. What's really happening now is that there are several efforts in the physical world to break that apart. You have the China's Belt and Road Initiative, you have Japan's QIP program, EU has program, the United States has programs. You have all of this moving in, and there's no general consensus on standardization. And so what's starting to happen within the way in which we want to see the global commons is becoming fractionalized. And so on top of that, you have a changing landscape in the business world. Who owns what? So you have a supply chain problem. And what we're finding is that in terms of being able to project the assumptions that we have in our war plan, what we have to change our thinking is it's quite possible that everything's fractionalized, and you've got areas in which you're going to have to fight back into place, and you're going to have to reestablish your own connectivity. You're going to have expeditionary capability that moves into these battle spaces, and the challenge is going to be that dual-use port that you think you had in even a NATO country, depending on the government that owns, on the global firm that owns it, it may be something that has to be considered as hostile. And so, while there's a tremendous amount of confidence in the operational force today, where we have challenges is the institution itself is still not there. The vulnerabilities are there. Our concepts of offense and defense have to be changed, because I think the surface area is much bigger to defend. And finally, I think the whole concept upon which NATO and the United States thinks about projection of power, the access to the global commons, all of these things are fundamentally at risk because of this new domain, this new space we call cyber. Thank you.
Now I'll invite Tom Bossert and Secretary Zdzikot to join the stage, please, for Q&A. And as I'll give a minute to our audience to think about the questions, I will ask one, which is, you've all had and have a long and distinguished careers, and I always like to ask people in your positions, what is it that keeps you and kept you awake at night?
I'd like to start by observing that General Alexander feels that General Mayville looks older. And I don't know if I want to weigh in by agreeing. But both of them got their gray hairs, honestly, by the answer to your question. And what keeps us up at night is usually the unknown. I don't know, I can't speak for others, but for me, I generally found myself becoming unusually comfortable with those threats that I understood, even those that were terrifying should they manifest. But what I couldn't sleep with was the notion that I didn't predict or failed to predict what might happen and take any responsible steps to mitigate it. That's the short answer for me.
Secretary?
Well, to predict a threat, a danger, is the highest level of defense. So I guess that we would all like to have that kind of capabilities. And what is the main issue that doesn't let us to sleep? Generally, as what I mentioned, finishing my short introducing remarks, is that it is not a case of a future, it is a case of every day. So everyone who deals with cyber issues, cyber defense, cyber security issues, knows that it is a very present threat. It is a threat of day-by-day activity. So as General Alexander said, everything happens Friday in the evening. So, but not only, unfortunately, not only on Friday, on every evening and every morning. So it is not something to can be recognized as a coming threat, but it is a threat of every day. So it is like that.
Sir?
I don't go to sleep thinking that there's a big event happening. I think the situation we face right now is more fundamental, and this is what just continues to eat away at me, is the fact that we just don't realize that we're in this space, and that every day that we policy can't figure out how to govern the activities. We don't have a forum for partnerships to find new solutions. We are eroding our strength, and we are enhancing or increasing our vulnerabilities. There isn't going to be a crisis tomorrow that is of such scale that we're going to wish. I just don't think that's what's going to happen, is a death by 1,000 cuts. And it's happening every day. And it is this slow drip and the inactivity of organizations. And I applaud this forum for bringing us together to talk about it. This is the challenge I think we face. This thing is right in front of us. It's coming, and we are choosing to not get ready for it. And this kind of apathy is what keeps me up.
One more supplement, if you let me.
Absolutely.
As present representative of public administration, one more crucial thing for especially public sector is how to gather all the best experts in public administration sector generally and widely understood. Because of course we are not competitive in the salaries. So we are doing a lot in Ministry of National Defense to gather all the best. We want to be visible as the very perspective place to work in, to have a career in cyberspace. For example, we were partnering for the first time in history in the end of 2018 in one of the biggest hackathons in the world, organized in Warsaw in November. And well, we are open for everyone, but of course it is a matter of in which stage of your life you are. If you are only willing to earn the most that is possible in the market generally, public administration is not the place. But if you want to every day, day by day, serve to your country, to protect your networks, to be a part of the national security environment, we are the place for you.
Wonderful. And if I just may, one other question. We've spoken about partnership, and we all spoke about partnership throughout the day and the presentation. And I just wanted to ask you to share some of the examples of really good public-private partnership that you've experienced in the course of your careers and in your positions.
Yeah, I'll start off with that because I believe this is one of the essential roles of government. I know we all, depending on where you are, your approach to the role of government varies, but I think for those of us in democratic societies realize that government could play a very important leadership role in setting the conditions to promote partnership. We've got to build a community of trust that allows partners to come together, and that they're, as a result of that partnership, working together on tough problems, they don't incur some sort of risk to themselves, their businesses. One area that I think that is that we have done better at in the military and in the Department of Defense is information sharing. There is a degree of partnership today that I've seen in my lifetime that's been fundamentally different. The culture has changed. Information sharing, where information we have in the military that we agree through the intelligence community, or whatever, that's shared, and there's a way to bring it out. The second thing is I've seen in the in industry and within government. Private-public partnerships, they call them nonprofits, literally coming together, and you can go into a room and find that you have FBI agents, you have Department of Homeland Security folks there, and you have the intelligence that they have brought there, and right in those same cubicles are representatives from industry who are feeding what they're seeing into this thing. And we have several of these centers set up. These are the kinds of things that need to happen routinely throughout the country.
I think I see this the same way, but maybe a little differently. For instance, I'm comfortable but not entirely convinced that this is a domain. The military generally, and most of our democratic government systems, has a monopoly on power in air, land, and sea. And I think it's the other way around in cyber. In fact, I'm not sure the government does much of anything in cyberspace. Now, we tax people and we take their money and employ it to great effect, but we are buying the intellect, the brains, the ingenuity of private industry in an increasingly dependent manner. And so while I believe that we should reserve certain uses of authorities for our military in cyberspace as elsewhere, I think that at this stage, private sector is leading. And so you ask, where are we sharing, where are we partnering? I think we need to catch them as opposed to letting them in more. And so with attribution, in this last 2 years, the U.S. has taken a decided policy towards faster and more public attribution based on a high degree of certainty, but not on such a high degree of certainty as to paralyze our ability to call out bad actors. In that regard, private industry has, in each instance, performed the key critical work and reached the conclusions faster than our internal government forensic analysts could. And so they were able to pinpoint Russia, they were able to pinpoint North Korea. Now, we had the ability to do it because of our intelligence collection capabilities, but that's an authority, not a capability. They did it without those authorities, and it was impressive. So information sharing is key, and I echo the General's views. But I think what we're going to have to do here to develop a better form of partnership is to develop a set of rules that don't depend on government leadership. And somebody last night referred to that as a horizontal approach as opposed to a vertical one. I wholeheartedly agree with that approach.
If I could, just one comment on the point that Tom's making. I've actually run into situations where within industry, lawyers did not want the information that about some sort of cyber attack getting to the CEO, or that the feed of cyber events going directly to the CEO because of the inherent liability that the CEO would have for that information if he or she did not make the right decision to their shareholders and whatnot. So I've also seen where within industry, where a revelation about certain vulnerabilities has an immediate effect on their market strength and their competitiveness. And so there is a great reluctance, even within the vertical of industry, to share. There's a reluctance, it will only go so far. And I think the role that government plays is resetting the table so that an envelope of trust falls on this so that we can get there. We are not there. And even within industry, I think, while they may have a lot of insight, I think there's a lot of challenges still to go. And that's our number one problem right now, is the lack of trust in the environment with which true partnerships can come.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that in the field of cybersecurity, the cooperation is simply inevitable for many reasons. And first of them is what I mentioned, the cross-border activity. So international relations and cooperation is crucial. It is just impossible to deal by yourself in this transnational environment with the threats that are coming from the other areas, other continents of the world. It is just a simple challenge to attack someone else on the other end of the world. Second thing is what was said here from this stage, that we are all in public administration, public sector, in private sector, we are all using tools created and delivered by private sectors, of course. Mostly, not only by private sector, because we are using some of them, of course, created by our own experts from the intelligence, from universities, but mostly from the private sector. Third thing is that it is a task for everyone. It is not a case of, a knight on a white horse will come and will save you. Mostly, no, he will not. Mostly, you will have to deal with the threats, with the attacks by yourself. So you have to be prepared, and everyone has to be prepared. And it starts from a very basic level, from the single employee using his own computer, his own laptop. And as I said, every chain is that strong as at its weakest point. So those are the three reasons for cooperation and, well, good practices. I guess that it is something what we are trying to do in Ministry of National Defense, because we have 5 military academies, military universities under the authority of Ministry of National Defense. A part of our cybersecurity ecosystem is military counterintelligence, of course, such as units, military units like National Cryptology Center. The chief of National Cryptology Center will be a part of this conference a little bit more in the evening, I guess. And then we have 2 companies working under authority of Ministry of National Defense. One of them especially dedicated to cybersecurity, which is called Exatel, and second one, Polish Armament Group, operating in those fields. So we are able to build the public-private partnership widely understood, including universities, private sector companies, intelligence, administration, and military itself.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience. One right there at the back, please.
Hi, Joanna Plucinska, a journalist with Reuters. I have a question regarding the Huawei case in Poland. We see, as you mentioned, Mr. Zdzikot, that in Poland, Huawei technology is very commonly used, and there's a clear accusation of spying. Should Poland seriously consider banning these products, and should it reconsider its work with China and Chinese companies?
Well, I guess that threats coming from the other countries, from the East generally, in Polish case, from China also, is not only a Polish case. Of course, we have these days we have an ongoing discussion connected with a very serious incident that is now being managed by the Internal Security Agency. So the discussion about which tools, which techniques to use, of course, it is the best to use your own ones. So it would be the best to use the ones that you have in your own country, prepared by your own. Like I heard a week or 2 weeks ago that, for example, Germany are considering to establish a national operator to build a 5G network. It is an idea of one of the ruling German parties appointed a couple of weeks ago. So generally, yes, I think that we should, as a NATO member, as European Union member, we should use technologies that are proved to be safe. And so, of course, starting from our own ones, and then the ones coming from the allied countries.
Well, there's a number of answers to this, and I would never jump in to existing Polish policymaking processes. So maybe to frame it from a U.S. perspective, let me start by suggesting that at least right now, the company rejects the notion and denies the notion that they're operating on behalf of the Chinese government, and instead is suggesting that it's just an individual that's acting on behalf of the Chinese government. At least that's what we're led to believe. So let's just leave that example and think of a hypothetical one. Or perhaps let me use an analogy. The United States decided that we couldn't get to a point where we excluded a foreign software product or hardware product in our current legal system, but we did have the purchasing power of our government, which is significant. And with respect to Kaspersky Labs, some of you are familiar with it, it's a cybersecurity tool that's used around the globe. We decided that a Russian-based company with Russian-based software subject to Russian authorities, even if they weren't currently under the direction of Russian government authorities, they could be later, was not a risk that we could tolerate on our networks. And so while I served in the U.S. White House in this Trump administration, we decided to no longer purchase, as a U.S. government, any Kaspersky software. And it took us some time, believe it or not, with the size of our government to expunge it from our system. We couldn't find it. It's in subcontractors' systems and so forth. But we've gotten to that point where they're gone. Now, I face a lot of questions. Are you telling me that we can no longer, as a U.S. citizen, buy Kaspersky Lab products? And I say, you make your own decision on risk management. But the United States government has decided it's a risk we can no longer take. So we led with our actions and not with our lecture. And it seems to have worked. The broader question of Huawei, let me just be provocative. The Chinese are excluding our companies and our systems and our solutions from their markets all the time. So I see no reason to shy away from considering excluding them from our markets. And if they don't like that, then they have only themselves to blame. Now, I don't recommend that course of action right now, and I understand the difficulties of competition, and the fact that most of the chipsets in the world are made in China complicates our options. But as a philosophical matter, there's no reason why we shouldn't treat China the way they treat us unless they show some strong and pretty quick evidence that they're going to change their behaviors.
I would just put a broader lens on this issue. I know it is an event in Poland, but I would say it's also something that NATO needs to pay attention to, and specifically the issue of interoperability. If we have systems we can't trust, and we're relying on those systems, and we try to bring formations together, and we don't have confidence, then you don't have confidence in the joint force. As I was saying earlier, this is the challenge we see now with this idea that there's a global commons, but that global commons is being broken up. Ports and places of embarkation or debarkation are being owned by different companies. Even international companies in countries that are members of NATO. And if they allow, as part of that business agreement, systems that we can't trust, do we even have access to the global commons? So I think this unique issue is one that is much broader than just one country. I think it has an impact on our alliance.
Yeah, it is a keyword, trust, because it is something that you cannot buy. You build it for years, so sometimes one incident destroys everything. So yes, we have to rely on partners and technologies that are trustworthy.
Good morning, Darek Saunders, Frontex Research and Innovation Unit. Dear Clara and dear Jens, thanks for this unique opportunity. I have a question, a concrete question on foresight. We agree that we need to work on today, but we need to look into the future too. And I wanted to ask you for your perception on disruptive technologies for the medium and long term. Medium thinking may be something other than quantum. So quantum communications, encryption, and in the long term or very long term, the artificial general intelligence or strong artificial intelligence. If you could share with us which other technologies you see in the foresight for cyber. Thank you very much.
Well, you've taken two big ones off the table. The ramifications of winning the quantum race are profound for anyone here who understands encryption. I think 40% of the internet traffic at this stage is encrypted at more than one level. Whoever wins that quantum race will end up probably the most powerful player in our future of our technological stability in this world. So, but you take that one off the table. Difficult to predict where the next breakthrough is. People talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning in application, and it would seem like that's the next step. But how we apply that, take those heuristic rules, teach a machine to look for negative but also positive behaviors, and then deploy it on our networks is yet to be answered. So I believe the government will probably follow as opposed to lead that. You know, I guess I'll throw in one novel one. We've talked about it a lot, so it's not going to be new, but the notion that we can now no longer believe everything we read, we've known that, but also no longer believe everything we see is quite terrifying. So this notion of deep fakes are familiar. The software necessary to modify video footage so that the face and the voice of the person is artificial and undetectable to the human eye has implications for law enforcement and national security that are pretty profound.
It's interesting, I would also add blockchain as well as something that will be just as dynamic, going to distributed ledgers. It gives us an opportunity to better protect certain things, particularly how we store data. So I would add that. Two comments. First, the promise of technology. Let's make sure that we work empirically on proven technology, on things that experience tells us will work before we divine too many theories. There's enough information out there and enough experience that I think it's very, very important that we approach our challenge through empirical review of the data. I can say with confidence that there is nothing in cyber today that scales to the full lethality of what's available in the physical force, in the physical world of joint forces. I can say that with tremendous confidence now that the coercive properties that we have in cyber are temporal and limited in terms of what in the concessions they produce. Now, that may change in time, but there are a whole lot of assumptions that have to happen, such as we do nothing. We choose not to invest in cybersecurity. We choose not to change our way. I'm confident that governments and people and militaries are going to keep up. Now, I'm not saying but I'm not saying things aren't going to be challenging. As I said, and I think the Secretary said as well, the space we're talking about is inherently asymmetrical, and it favors the attacker. So let's recognize that regardless of the technology, that imbalance is what we have to manage. The last thing I'll just say is I think it's a combination of policy and people and the social aspects to it, but it also is technology. There is solutions in technology, and I think what we don't have today is how policymakers and economists and politicians and diplomats and fill in that area of space, how they intertwine with the technology. And I think that the solutions are how we harness technology for traditional tools of statecraft.
Well, it is always not easy for the acting Deputy Ministry of National Defense to take part in Q&A questions, because when like 95% of the documents are classified, it is not easy to answer for a question. That's why I don't do that very often. So generally I will speak as an individual, as personally what I think. Generally, I guess that, first of all, Internet of Things concept is growing very rapidly, and I guess it is a future, and it is also a challenge for everyone who deals with cybersecurity issues. Because when we are going to have, well, we have like 15 or 17 billions of items still connected to the internet these days. But until next year, the end of next year, it's going to be at 20 billions of them. So it is growing very rapidly, maybe automotive cars and everything that is connected to Internet of Things concept. Second one is blockchain, of course. Third issue is cryptography connected with what you said just before about encrypting the internet generally and the communication in the global network. So this is the third issue. We are preparing, and we have an ongoing number of projects, R&D projects in the MND, but they are mostly classified. Two of them, for example, provided by our company, Zdzikot, are connected with, which are not classified, are connected with SDN box, SDN technologies. And second one with anti-DDoS TAM, like a very organized and self-managed equipment for dealing with DDoS attacks.
I think we have time for...
maybe one more.
Yeah.
Marcin Spychała, IBM Security. As always, it was a pleasure to listen to you guys. Yeah, over here, standing next to the door. Here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi. Listen, you mentioned even twice two aspects of the modern warfare. One, the asynchronous aspect of the warfare that favors the attacker. And the second, the disproportion is the salaries in public sector, regardless of the country we are actually considering. So my question is around your views about using the official and open bug bounty programs to support and strengthen the security of the federal institutions. And I'm equally interested in the US view, like in Polish view. If you can share if you use it and how much you use it, that would be really great.
Specifically to bug bounty, we have several programs, and their usefulness is that they reveal every day, something that maybe we didn't see. But why wouldn't you have a bug bounty program in every business location spot? Certainly you need to have something as part of your cybersecurity platform, something that provides you feedback. And so it's something that I think is the kind of thing that everyone looks at and says, of course you have those programs at various levels. Let me just, though, back away a little bit and remind you that, remind the audience that the vast majority of cybersecurity challenges begins with a human error. And we have today, I think, more than anything else, this illiterate societies. People make decisions in cyber every day on behalf of their businesses and their personal life without really fully appreciating what they're doing and how they are disadvantaging themselves. We have an education problem. We have an education at every generation and in every country and in any way you want to slice it. And so I think that you can have all of these programs, bug bounty, you can have the best technology in the world, you can have the best processes in the world, you can have the best military in the world. But until we fundamentally change the cybersecurity illiteracy and recognize that we need societies that are cyber literate, I don't know that we're going to really solve the challenges we face that bug bounty and programs like that are designed to go after.
And if I just may, I will try to very imperfectly channel Katie Masor, is the mother of all bug bounty programs, and she always says, it is not a substitute for a sophisticated security program, because there are organizations who are trying to implement these programs, but they do not have internal processes to actually act on the vulnerabilities that are found. So while they're, I think, a very useful practice that are now being widely deployed in the private sector, the Pentagon had a bug bounty program and some other Air Force in the United States, the problem is now being that they are sometimes seen as a substitute for robust security. So while it's an addition, it should never be a substitute for any security practice. And I think we have time for one last question.
Clara, if I could, while we wait for the next person, we have something called a vulnerabilities equities process in the United States. I think there might be something similar here, but let me speak to that quickly because it's kind of a bug bounty, if you will. The U.S. government has a lot of resources, and we have a lot of really smart people that look for vulnerabilities in software and hardware, and we find quite a few. What we do as a policy is give those vulnerabilities to the owners and operators of the software, the developers of the software and the hardware. That's a pretty profound, fundamental, defensive, and I think worthwhile position to take. So I promote it to you. And I ask you to think it through, because the first thing we find is that we give out this vulnerabilities information under the expectation that the people that receive it will take it and remedy the vulnerability in their software and hardware. What is astonishing to me is that they don't always do so. So we give away around about 90% of the vulnerabilities that we discover in an attempt to defend the greater whole of our country. We keep the 10% for our own purposes, for the national security of our country. And we don't discuss why or what we keep and how we use it. But I'll tell you that you don't have to have too much imagination to realize that what we discover using those vulnerabilities when we apply them for our own national defense tends to constitute that information that is the most sought after when we talk about information sharing. So there's layers to this theory that allow us to defend the everyday citizen. And it is astonishing with bug bounties and with our VEP process how few software and hardware developers actually take advantage of the opportunity to remedy their own vulnerabilities in their own products. Unless there's a financial motive or incentive to do so, they tend to either do or ignore. And so bug bounties are great. And we have a really big one called a vulnerabilities equities process where the U.S. government actually finds the bugs for our citizens. But it's not always used. And then lastly, if I can, I'll extol the Israeli system because there's a part of the questionnaire we didn't answer about education and about salaries. If we can find better ways to allow that and embrace that revolving door between industry, academia, and government, I think that we'll have a better workforce. There's a lot of people that work for or have worked for General Mayville and for General Alexander who are really smart and they're there for the mission, not for the paycheck. If we could give them a few years to go out and make that big paycheck and give them an opportunity to come back and recognize their service through promotion and so forth, I think that we'd have a better, stronger workforce.
It is a very good question. In 2018, we have done a lot to generally open the military and the Ministry of National Defense to the society, to the world of cybersecurity experts, because, as I said, we have strong belief that it is our national treasure. So in the end of last year, we have organized Polish military center of cyber operations, which is a military unit was preparing was a partner of one of the biggest in the world hackathons, and we treat it as a first step. So, as I said, we want to be seen as a place to have a great career in the cybersphere. And as I was talking with Chief of Illinois National Guard, General Hayes, and we were talking about the same issue, how to do that, to gather the experts, to get them to the military, to the public administration. And it is not only the salary that decides. You can just want to be a part of the national security ecosystem, and patriotic reasons are also very important, and sometimes they are the points to decide, the right point to decide to become a part of the military. So we want to be open. We started last year. We will do much more this year. 2019 will be the year of broader opening of the military, of Ministry of National Defense to the experts from the civilian market. And I guess I'm almost confident that we have an offer for everyone. So that's why I come to almost every hackathon conference, and I say always, we want you. So we want you to be a part of the military, of Ministry of National Defense. Come to us and help us to protect our country.
Well, that's great. Well, we'll close with this great remark. Thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you very much, Tom, General Mayville. And please join me in thanking our speakers for this great panel. We will now break for coffee until 11:45. Please be back in this room at 11:45. Thank you so much.